Thank you. For the public defender.
Yes.
I got a couple of questions. One, are the police, is there a special police squad assigned to this court?
Not a special police squad, typically the vice squad, which investigates and polices prostitution, will do the raids of the massage parlors where a lot of my clients are being arrested, as well as they will watch essentially the places where prostitutes and sex workers typically are on the street. It's the vice squad that's usually in charge of doing these raids and investigations.
And that I understand, but let me reword that. Is there a special squad? I don't think I'm using the right word, but is there a special squad that would work with, once arrested, then follow through into the court system? That's it. They just shuffle the case over to court.
Correct. They're just arrested and
But
then they're...
nothing's changed.
Correct. From arrest to their arraignment, nothing has changed. The police arrest them, they charge them with a specific charge like prostitution or loitering for the purposes of prostitution, and then they are sent to the court to be arraigned. It's once they're at the arraignment and in the court that now their case is put into this specialized court, the Human Trafficking Intervention Court.
That's kind of shameful. I mean, gang squads follow it all the way through into the court system here in Rhode Island. I can't.
We have looked into having NYPD come and talk to us about training their officers and identifying victims of trafficking and sensitivity training, but NYPD has been reluctant to take a seat at the table with us.
And the services in New York, right?
Yes.
All the social services, welfare, child, are they heavily involved in this?
No, not at all. We have individual organizations that come into the court and offer services to our clients, and we will work, depending on what the client needs. If it's a Mandarin-speaking client, we have organizations that will work with those clients. If they're transgender clients, we have organizations that work with them. Spanish-speaking, we have a lot of organizations that are in the court providing services.
And I guess my final question to the professor. So, do we have statistics? I mean, the public defender just mentioned it, but women or men of color in prostitution. Has that been focused or talked about, or has anybody done anything about that?
So, I mean, what's interesting is that the commercial sex industry is actually quite diverse, and men, women, boys, girls participate in the commercial sex industry. The policing of the commercial sex industry is less diverse, and the policing of the commercial sex industry focuses on women of color. And that is played out in statistics across the country. In New York, we looked at 1,400 prostitution cases in 1 year, and we identified that 98% of people arrested identified as women. 89% of people arrested were people of color. So there are actually quite a few statistics that show the trends of policing. That is not necessarily representative of who is involved in the commercial sex industry, because that is a wide range of people. I would also point out one of the benefits of a potential study, in addition to recognizing that court initiatives exist across the country and need to be analyzed, is thinking about how to back up the process and get these community-based organizations in earlier. So in many places across the country, we're looking at pre-arrest diversion, right, where police are actually engaging with community-based organizations and doing non-arrest interventions with people in the sex industry that then avoid the harm of becoming court involved, which, you know, as Jillian mentioned, comes with a lot of collateral consequences. Obviously, we know this, but thinking about where we can back that up to make people safer, and you're going to hear, I think, more about this from witnesses that are coming, more willing to report violence when it occurs, when they experience it.
And I'll let you go at this. You said non-arrest is. First of all, you're talking to a former cop, okay? So you said non-arrest, okay? Well, what does non-arrest mean to you? I know what it means to me, but.
So non-arrest means that there's some interaction on the street, most likely.
Yeah.
And then the options are sort of set from different categories so that police officers are allowed to make referrals to public health centers, to medical care, to other community-based organizations that are on call. And, you know, in places where this has begun, what police forces are really kind of recognizing and beginning to think about is how this changes community police relations. And the ability to recognize, particularly for low-level offenses, and in most places across this country, prostitution is treated as a low-level offense, right? So we're not talking about incorporating violent offenses in this or more serious offenses, but for low-level offenses that a lot of police officers, I'm not going to speak for you and your experience.
I'm going, don't worry
Yeah,
about
but
it.
a lot of police officers resent the arrest imperative on the low-level offenses because it's tedious, it's repetitive. They see that it's not working. They see that the underlying conditions that are leading to arrest are not being resolved in this way. So many law enforcement agencies across the country are actually excited to think about how can we reframe. And that's part of this conversation too. What it does then is it improves the community-police relationship to the point where, again, when the things that we are concerned about, the things, violence, sexual violence particularly, exploitation, right, when they occur, that people then are more likely to come forward and report that. And there's been an interesting experience with this in San Francisco on the municipal level, and I think you'll hear more about other efforts across the country tonight. But it's something that this commission would be able to really dig into and think about how that would work here locally.
And just for this great committee, for you all, because you already understand it, but for this committee, I ended my career in community policing. It's one of the best things going. It got to the point where I got to know how much of a balance somebody had in their checking account. So community policing is a good way to go. We did not back in that, when it first started, we didn't get involved in the whole issue of prostitution because we handle it a different way. But policing needs to change constantly, and I think this definitely will happen. We okay, Anastasia? Good. All right, good. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes. What time did you train?
7:25.
Okay, 6:52. So I've got one
Luggage is
question.
somewhere else, though, so
On
factor that in.
on the statistics, on the statistics,
Yeah.
you mentioned the arrest statistics. How do those compare to the actual population of individuals involved in? So you're saying, do you understand what I'm saying?
So these are really difficult and thorny questions, and when you hear data in this area, you should always be very sort of cautious, right? Because there is no standard or uniform measurement of commercial sex activity across the country. The only measure we have is that which is policed, and that which comes into our court system is criminal. So what we know, though, is that if you peruse advertisements for commercial sex, or you think about who may be involved in commercial sex or who is and what the markets are, they look much different than who's policed, but there's no uniform data available on commercial sex activity across the board.
I will just say that in my 5 years of working in the human trafficking court, I've never had a cisgendered male client come through. There's never been an arrest for prostitution of a cisgendered male client for myself. It's only been trans or cis women.
And have you looked at, say, some of the European countries that, the participants, for lack of a better term, in that particular, in the arena there? Do you draw any conclusions between what goes on in Europe versus what goes on here to get an idea of what the real numbers are? Is that something you could possibly do?
I would hesitate to say that gets us at the real numbers, because again, I think it's a very difficult thing to measure. I think what you do see when you look at policing practices and arrest practices across the world is that same dynamic exists. So that does certainly corroborate that women of color, and poor women bear the brunt of this policing across the world.
Any further questions of the witnesses? Yes, Blake.
Is it mostly disparate impact or a racial bias? Because I'm trying to dig into the numbers, and I think statistics we need.
I mean, so
to have
this
a
is a
little more
very complicated
information.
question, and I'm not going to be able to articulate it to the constitutional standards of, whether this is disparate impact. I think policing, municipal level policing, right, focuses on certain communities, certain geographic areas, and that would lead to these disparities that we see. There's also a certain notion of who is working in the most vulnerable and exposed conditions. So people who work on the street, for example, right, versus people who have the ability to rent hotel rooms, to engage in higher end areas that are least likely to come in contact with the police. So there's a lot of different factors that determine who is even made visible to policing. And of course, that's deeply intertwined with race and class. So it's hard to pull them out in that way, I think.
So you can't say that two people who are practicing the same type of prostitution in the same type of area
Right.
would be treated differently based on their skin color. We can't say that, but we can say we can look at the numbers and determine that maybe there's different activities going on amongst prostitution based on race.
I think, or just what's visible, yes. And
Okay.
what,
Areas that police are targeting.
Understand.
and an interesting statistic also just about New York is that, Jillian mentioned the policing of massage parlors. And this is something we've seen a huge increase of in New York over the last 5 years. And this is predominantly Chinese and Korean women. And so, right, that's not necessarily representative of who gives massage in this country or who, right, that's not, it's just, again, what's visible and therefore what gets policed. And there are a lot of factors that contribute to that, I think.
Thank you.